country is currently undergoing social and political upheaval since the death of former leader Hugo Chavez. They held a meeting behind closed doors, but during their formal greeting, the atmosphere seemed relaxed. Pope Francis joked and President Maduro was quite talkative. During their 20-minute-long meeting, the two leaders spoke about the situation in Venezuela following the death of Chavez. Even when the Pope greeted Maduro's entourage, he didn't lose the opportunity to make a few funny remarks. As a gift, the Pope received an image of the Virgin of Coromoto, who is the patroness of Venezuela, also a lithograph of Simón Bolívar, and a sculpted image of José Gregorio Hernández, a doctor from Caracas whose beatification process is currently underway. In turn, the Pope gave Maduro a white pen from the Vatican Museum and a copy of the Aparecida Conclusion. At the end of the meeting, Pope Francis blessed the Venezuelan president by tracing a sign of the cross over his forehead. The Pope isn't just the leader of more than 1 billion Catholics. He's also the head of the Vatican City State. It's the smallest country in the world, but it definitely has political pull. The relationship between the Holy See and Russia has a complicated past. After years of tension during the Cold War, their ties improved after the fall of the Berlin Wall and after Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev met with John Paul II back in 1989. Years have passed and the relationship has improved. Pope Francis met with Putin back on November 25, 2013 for roughly 35 minutes, this before meeting with the Vatican's diplomatic team. And now, in addition to discussing the role of Russia in Ukraine and Syria, interreligious collaboration will surely be on the list. It's estimated that there are roughly 100 million Orthodox in Russia alone.
Additionally, it is likely they will discuss about the possibility in the Pope visiting Russia. This is because now the relations between Rome and the Patriarch of Moscow are more cordial. The meeting is expected to be long. In the past, the discussions have lasted 35 to 50 minutes. If he stays true to his style, Vladimir Putin will be late. He's the only world leader who makes even the Pope wait.
Francis said he hoped the nuclear deal reached with Iran may be a definitive step toward a more secure and fraternal world.
Hassan Rouhani's trip to Vatican City is part of the first state visit by an Iranian president to Europe in 17 years. The meeting showcases a long-standing relationship between the Vatican and Iran.
The world's smallest army, the Swiss Guard. With their multicolored uniforms and medieval weapons, tourists visiting St. Peter's Square in Vatican City might find them quaint. What most don't realize is that these men are indeed soldiers, trained in close combat and protection. Today, the Swiss Guard form an army of 135 men, all of whom have taken an oath to lay down their lives for the sovereign pontiff.
If someone runs at the Pope with a knife, I'm not saying I'd be proud to kill that person, but I think it would be necessary for the good of the church.
Everybody's wondering today, did J.D. Vance kill the Pope?
Let me ask you about another area that you campaigned on quite a lot, and there was a flurry of activity on, and that has to do with immigration.
Sure.
The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops this week condemned some of the executive orders signed by President Trump, specifically those allowing immigration and customs enforcement to enter churches and to enter schools. Do you personally support the idea of conducting a raid or enforcement action in a church service, at a school?
Well, let me address this. Of course, if you have a person who is convicted of a violent crime, whether they're an illegal immigrant or a non-illegal immigrant, you have to go and get that person to protect the public safety. That's not unique to immigration. But let me just address this particular issue, Margaret, because as a practicing Catholic, I was actually heartbroken by that statement. And I think that the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops needs to actually look in the mirror a little bit and recognize that when they receive over $100 million to help resettle illegal immigrants, Are they worried about humanitarian concerns, or are they actually worried about their bottom line? We are going to enforce immigration law. We're going to protect the American people.
Yeah.
Donald Trump promised to do that. And I believe the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, if they're worried about the humanitarian costs of immigration enforcement, let them talk about the children who have been sex trafficked because of the wide open border of Joe Biden.
You personally
let them talk
support them
about
going
people
into
like
schools
Laken
and
Riley
churches.
who were brutally murdered. I support us doing law enforcement against violent criminals, whether they're illegal immigrants or anybody else, in a way that keeps us safe. Let me ask this question, Margaret. Let's separate the immigration issue. If you had a violent murderer in a school, of course I want law enforcement to go and get that person out.
Of course.
So what's the point of the question?
You changed the regulation this week. That's the point of the question.
Exactly.
Giving the authority
Yes.
to go into churches and go into schools.
We empowered law enforcement to enforce
But
the
that
law
also
everywhere
has
to
a
protect
knock-on
Americans.
effect, a chilling effect, arguably, to people to not send their kids to school.
I desperately hope it has a chilling
in the
effect on
churches,
illegal
you think
immigrants
the
coming
U.S.
into our country.
Conference of Catholic Bishops are actively hiding criminals?
I think the U.S.
law enforcement?
Conference of Catholic Bishops has frankly not been a good partner in common sense immigration enforcement that the American people voted for. And I hope, again, as a devout Catholic, that they'll do better.
So good to see you. Pray for you every day. God bless you.
The Vice President, who has been visiting Italy with his family this weekend, met senior Vatican officials for more formal talks. The Pope did not take part in those discussions. The Pope and Vatican officials have criticized several of the policies of President Donald Trump's administration. Francis has called the immigration crackdown a disgrace. Vance, who became Catholic in 2019, has cited medieval-era Catholic teaching to justify the policy.
This is the notorious Naval Engineering School in Buenos Aires. Between 1976 and 1983, Argentina's dictatorship turned it into a prison and torture center for dissidents.
This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Juan Gonzalez. Welcome to all of our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world. An historic trial that began Tuesday in Argentina is set to reveal new details about how 6 Latin American countries coordinated with each other in the 1970s and 1980s to eliminate political dissidents. The campaign, known as Operation Condor, involved military dictatorships in Argentina, Bolivia, Brazil, Chile, Paraguay, Peru, and Uruguay. They worked together to track down and kidnap and kill people they labeled as terrorists, leftist activists, labor organizers, students, priests, journalists, guerrilla fighters, and their families. The campaign was launched by Chilean dictator Augusto Pinochet, and evidence shows the CIA and former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger were complicit from its outset. At least 25 military generals are facing charges, and more than 500 witnesses are expected to testify during the trial. Last August, an Argentine federal judge issued a formal request to the Obama administration's Justice Department to make Kissinger himself available for questioning. The Obama administration did not respond.
This is the notorious Naval Engineering School in Buenos Aires. Between 1976 and 1983, Argentina's dictatorship turned it into a prison and torture center for dissidents. Among the prisoners were 2 Jesuit priests, Orlando Yorio and Francisco Jalix. Their families asked the then head of Argentina's Jesuits, Jorge Mario Bergoglio, now Pope Francis, to help get them released. Some now allege he turned a blind eye to their plight, and Bergoglio was called to testify twice as a witness in crimes against humanity cases. The church hierarchy never spoke out against the military regime, and some bishops even supported it.
Operation Condor was born in the 1970s. The Cuban Revolution coincided with a number of independence and anti-colonial movements across the global south. In Latin America, this energy was met with a series of right-wing military coups across the continent for over a decade. In 1964 in Brazil, in 1971 in Bolivia, in Chile and Uruguay in 1973, and in Argentina in 1976. The new regimes were ruthless, subjecting their opposition to measures like targeted arrests, imprisonment, torture, kidnappings, rape, and murder. While Operation Condor was not a U.S. program, declassified documents show it undeniably had the backing of the US. The US was equally paranoid about Latin America becoming a base for left-wing uprisings, and the brutality of Operation Condor was a convenient and effective method of containment. The Condor program existed during both the Nixon-Ford and Carter administrations. The Nixon-Ford administration directly financed and armed many of the dictatorships involved. The US also directly trained many officials who went on to create the Condor system at the US Army School of the Americas training camp in Panama, where they were taught counterinsurgency tactics. The US also provided communication support, which was crucial to the operation of the Condor program. There is no question that the US had full knowledge of the scope and brutality of what was taking place. Operation Condor began to collapse in the late 70s after the assassination of Orlando Letelier, but the end of the Condor program did not spell an end to political repression and violence in the region. The different regimes, agents, and police continued to cooperate to kidnap, murder, and torture people for years to come. The Condor program resulted in an estimated 50,000 killed, 30,000 disappeared, and up to 400,000 arrested and imprisoned.
Days after the conclave ends, the rule of Pope Francis in the Argentine dictatorship hounds him. Verbitsky publishes a photo of Bergoglio giving Holy Communion to Videla. Critics also bring up the case of two Jesuits whom Bergoglio allegedly failed to protect from the dictatorship.
With this symbolic military salute, the former superior general of the Jesuits, Adolfo Nicolas, handed the baton to the next leader of the Society of Jesus, the Venezuelan Arturo Sosa. In the meantime, in the General Curia in Rome, there were satisfied looks all around. A spokesperson made the announcement.
He is the delegate for the International Roman Houses of the Society of Jesus.
One of the electors was Father Federico Lombardi, former spokesman for the Pope and a good friend of the new general. He said that Father Arturo Sosa is a reflection of the moment the Jesuits are living.
The Pope has signed a canon law that would create personal ordinariates, which would pave the way for Anglicans to become Catholics. The law would allow them to hold on to many of their own customs and traditions. The document is an apostolic constitution called Anglicorium Cetibus, which means groups of Anglicans.
I am very proud to be here, but also very nervous, very worried. I've been nervous all day, and the reason I've been nervous is quite simple, and that is that this motion matters to me. It matters to me greatly. It's not a joke, it's not a game, it's not just a debate. I genuinely believe that the Catholic Church is not, to put it at its mildest, a force for good in the world. And therefore it is important for me to try and marshal my facts as well I can to explain why I think that. But I want first of all to say that I have no quarrel, no argument, and I wish to express no contempt for individual devout and pious members of that church. I said, let's think of this square mile. Just imagine in this square mile how many people were burned for reading the Bible in English. And one of the principal burners and torturers of those who tried to read the Bible in English here in London was Thomas More. You may know if you've read the novel Wolf Hall, who won the Man Booker Prize just the other day. Now, that's a long time ago. It's not relevant, except that it was only last century that Thomas More was made a saint, and it was only in the year 2000 that the last pope, the Pole, he made Thomas More the patron saint of politicians.
I have a story today that is really a contrast between two different stories that illustrates the disconnect or the virtual schism in the church today. There are numerous factions in the Church of Christ, one being painted with broad strokes to be called traditional Catholicism, and the other are, of course, the modernists, though they never call themselves that. Their position is pretty simple. They've held power in the church since the late 1950s to varying degrees, have near absolute power now in the church, and wants to bring a church into being that, in their words, listens to the Spirit speaking through the world for guidance. Now contrast that with traditional Catholics who simply want the same faith as has always been taught and proclaimed by the church for millennia, and you get a striking contrast. And this contrast is evident in two stories. The first is a story from America Magazine, where our new favorite Jesuit, Father Jim McDermott, appears to be praising the possibility of Francis imploding the church.
All right, I am a publisher, a writer, a playwright. Otis Abe's Assassination is a murder mystery dinner theater that I produced in South Jersey at Wedgwood Country Club. It's a dark comedy, and it's about the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, our 16th president. The Emancipation Proclamation freeing the slaves was officially issued on January 1st, 1863, by President Abraham Lincoln. Archbishop John Hughes, who laid the cornerstone for the building of St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York City, instigated the New York City bloody draft riots, which caused the desertion of the Irish Catholics in New York to leave the Union Army. We got to talk about December 1863, because by December 1863, Jefferson Davis, the first and last president of the Confederate States of America, the Confederacy, has been having these secret communications with Pope Pius IX. And Pope Pius IX, on December 3rd, dates this letter, December 3rd, 1863, at the end of the year, to illustrious, honorable Jefferson Davis, president of the Confederacy, and admiring him and telling him that they've got the support of the Vatican and the Pope. I ordered on September 4th, 2025, a Liverpool merchant house. It is about the Knights Hospitallers and international bankers that serve in the four inns of court called Lincoln's Inns in London, England. And these are the descendants, these international bankers, of the Roman Catholic Knights of Malta, Knights Hospitallers, and Knights Templars, Teutonic Knights, and of course the Jesuits, the Order of St. John. Now, here's a book over here, top right, written by the co-inventor of Morse code, Samuel Finley Breeze Morse, and it is titled Foreign Conspiracy Against the Liberties of the United States. Samuel Morse wrote under a pen name as Brutus. These articles, he lived in Italy and lived in Southern Europe for a very long time as a spy for U.S. presidents before our Foreign Service Office. And in fact, the Jesuits, Georgetown University, Edmund A. Walsh School of Foreign Service was established in 1990, 6 years before the United States actually had its own Foreign Service Office. What's interesting about the Edmund A. Walsh School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University was this guy, Edmund Walsh, was a Jesuit priest who founded this school, the first school for international affairs in the United States. This guy, Edmund A. Walsh, he was running all around the world. He was going to Mexico, he was going to Russia, you name it. And he established this school in 1919 during the rise of fascism, Bolshevism, and Nazism to train America's, Great Britain's, and Germany's occult fool society diplomats, businessmen, bankers, merchants within education focused on international relations through this Georgetown University Edmund A. Walsh School of Foreign Service and the American Catholic Historical Association, which was also established in 1919. Now, get this. This Edmund A. Walsh School of Foreign Service was renamed after the 9/11 terrorist attacks on America financier Saudi Prince Al-Walid. After the billionaire terrorism financier Saudi Prince Al-Walid gave $20 million each to Harvard University and to the Jesuits, Georgetown University. The Jesuits needed the money, and they got a lot of lawsuits. So they said they would rename the Edmund A. Walsh School of Foreign Service His Royal Highness Prince Al-Walid bin Talal Center for Muslim and Christian Understanding. This is the thing. I write as a playwright, as a writer, as a Christian apologist. I write in the style of Mel Brooks. And if you remember at the end of Blazing Saddles, Mel Brooks has the Nazis fighting with all these other groups, and it's a dark comedy. And this is what Honest Abe's Assassination is. It's a dark comedy. But it is also includes the history of the Jesuits. It includes we have a part where everybody in the audience is given a fan, and they're supposed to scream out during the play, "It's not the Illuminati!" Well, you got to go back to history here, okay? When you look at John D. Rockefeller and the Anglo-Persian Oil Company and Saudi Aramco, that's the American Arabian Oil Company, going back to the 30s, the discovery of black gold, crude oil in the Middle East, and the concessions that were given to like DRC. And you got to think about Lawrence of Arabia and what he was doing over in the Middle East. T.E. Lawrence, also known as Lawrence of Arabia, Gertrude Bell advocated for independent Arab states in the Middle East following the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, and supported the installation of the Hashemite dynasty in what is today Jordan and Iraq, ancient Babylon. The Apostle Peter in the Holy Bible also refers to Rome as Babylon in 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 13. And now you have this Jesuit Edmund A. Walsh School of Foreign Service, renamed after the financier of the 9/11 terrorist attacks on America that nobody likes to talk about. But this is the history they'd love to censor. They don't want you to connect the dots to how Edmund A. Walsh arrived in Moscow, Russia, to carry out economic and financial interest of the Jesuits in the Vatican in Russia, how he went to and carried on these interests in Mexico and South America to control oil. But of course, they call it a diplomatic mission. But in the mid-1830s, U.S. presidents, especially Protestant presidents of the United States, realized that the power of the papacy and the Vatican and the Jesuits infiltrating America was a foreign conspiracy. So they commissioned Samuel Morse, who was a painter of presidents and landscapes, to travel and live in Italy and live in Southern Europe. And there he was able to use his cover as an artist and a historian and a traveler to uncover the conspiracy from the papacy as well as its international bankers, the Knights Hospitallers, the English Catholic, Roman Knights of Malta, Anglo-Catholic, the Teutonic Knights, and all the are their affiliated Crown of England, and Rome's statue, eventually European Union influence upon America. So it is Rome. All roads lead to Rome. And this was the conspiracy against Abraham Lincoln and his assassination by the U.S. Catholic bishops that conspired with the Surratt family, the Booth family, but you have to look at the history of Alfred Booth and Company. They were located in South America. They were located on the docks in New York City. They controlled the docks, and the merchant house of Liverpool controlled, of course, London and the Four Inns of Court, known as Lincoln's Inn, also known as the Temple Bar. I always say it's 5,000 barristers and international bankers. Well, folks, guess what? It's up to 8,000 international bankers and barristers who answer to nobody in the United Kingdom Parliament. They are autonomous and they control all commerce around the world. In fact, in America, and between Europe, the last time I checked, there were $711 trillion in over-the-counter trading. meaning that that type of trading and commerce is not on any stock exchange in the world. Now you're getting the big picture. Follow the money trail. Abraham Lincoln printed greenbacks. Abraham Lincoln was more afraid of the international bankers at his back than he was of the Confederate Army in front of him. And in fact, the Liverpool Merchant House was bankrolled by the Confederate States of America. Cotton and tobacco was king, and the Booth and Company that was located in South America and in London and in New York City controlled all the shipping trade of cotton, tobacco, you name it. In fact, Charles Booth, the Honorable Charles Booth, didn't die until 1916, and Alfred Booth and Company didn't break up until 1986. 1986, folks. So, and they didn't really break up. They just sold the company. So the company's still in existence. And Sherry Blair Booth, the wife of Tony Blair of the Tony Blair Phony Faith Foundation and the UN-Vatican sponsored Faith and Globalization Initiative, is a John Wilkes Booth descendant. The Crown of England has always, as our ally, has always worked against us in World War I, in World War II, until there was enough public outcry. And in fact, they backed Adolf Hitler, and many members of the royal family of England were actually high-ranking Nazi officers that supported Adolf Hitler and Benito Mussolini until there was enough public outcry. The Bush family in America were the bankers to the Nazis until there was enough public outcry, and they seized Union Banking Corporation, which was located at 39 Broadway in New York City, was the Nazi bank. Madison Square Garden, the Nazis were marching. In 1929, the German Ski Club of New York was established, and these Germans went back to Germany to fight and then snuck back into the United States from South America and Canada. Was established in Harriman State Park. William Averill Harriman himself, who became governor eventually, was a banker to the Nazis, as well as Prescott Sheldon Bush, the father of CIA George H.W. Bush, and the grandfather of George W. Bush and Jeb Bush.
A series of recently opened Vatican archives are shedding new light on the relationship between Pope Pius XII and Adolf Hitler as he led Nazi Germany during World War II. Amna Nawaz looks at what we are learning and how it changes our thinking about the Vatican during that time.
A new book published today takes a deeper look at these revelations. Historian David Kurtzer is the author of that book. It's called The Pope at War, The Secret History of Pius XII, Mussolini, and Hitler. And he joins me now. What does that mean when you say protect the church? For example, you mentioned these meetings that we now know happened between the Pope and a personal envoy of Hitler. What did we learn about those? What were those talks like?
Well, probably the most shocking finding from these newly opened Vatican archives that just opened 2 years ago after 50 years of pressure and interest in being able to see what they contain is that within weeks of Pius XII being elected Pope, he's elected in early 1939, Hitler saw an opportunity and decided to send a personal envoy, who himself is a rather colorful character, the great-grandson of Queen Victoria of England, a Nazi prince who was married to the daughter of the King of Italy. And he would begin to shuttle back and forth between Hitler and the Pope over the next 2 years, engaged in secret negotiations. We didn't know about these until just now.